All right, guys. So last night was an absolute travesty, a miscarriage of justice in the most extreme form that you could possibly imagine, as the state of Missouri pushed forward with the execution of Marcellus Williams. So we're going to get to some of the latest details here from CBS News. We also have this point-by-point breakdown that was put out by the Innocence Project on exactly what the flaws within his case were. And the Innocence Project has been leading the charge on trying to get him off of death row. You also had millions of people across the country who were taking place in either calling local politicians or showing up to their offices or petitioning, doing everything that they could to prevent this man from being killed by the state of Missouri. And there were so many different layers of issues with his case and with his conviction that we're going to get to here. But essentially it looks like, you had the victim's family in the case, as well as the prosecutor, who were saying he shouldn't be executed. You had manipulation of evidence, and you had DNA evidence that could have potentially been exculpatory in proving his innocence. You had a racially charged jury selection process where prospective jury members were removed from the pool purely based on their race. So, so many different issues here that were culminating into this one situation that I think is, a lesson in terms of the broader issues with our criminal justice system here, and specifically with the death penalty here in the United States. So let's go ahead and get into it here from CBS News. They say the state of Missouri on Tuesday executed Marcellus Williams shortly after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a request to delay the execution, and the State Department of Corrections said that he was pronounced dead at 6:10 p.m. Central Time. They say Williams, who had maintained his innocence in the 1998 stabbing death of Felicia Gale in a St. Louis suburb, was put to death by lethal injection. Now, lethal injection as a manner of killing somebody in and of itself has so many different issues, but we'll save that for a different video. They continue here with the Missouri Department of Corrections director, this guy Trevor Foley, and this was his quote. He says, "We hope this gives finality to a case that has languished for decades." I guess in one sense it gives it finality, but in like the most fucked up way that you could possibly think of. Finality. Even the victim's family was saying he didn't deserve to be executed. So what exactly is that quote supposed to mean? They continue. They say, but St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell, who had sought to have the conviction overturned, said this outcome did not serve the interests of justice, and I think that's putting it lightly. He continued, he said, Marcellus Williams should be alive today. There were multiple points in the timeline when decisions could have been made that would have spared him the death penalty. If there is even a shadow of a doubt of his innocence, the death penalty should never be an option. They say also down here that earlier efforts to halt the execution were denied on Monday, just 2 days ago, by the Missouri Supreme Court and Republican Governor Mike Parson. His execution is the third in Missouri this year and amongst 5 taking place nationwide across a 7-day span if all are carried out on schedule, according to the Death Penalty Information Center. They say Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson said that they would have granted the request to halt the execution. So all of the liberal justices were on the side of Marcellus not being killed by the state of Missouri. They say tonight, Missouri will execute an innocent man. This is according to attorney Tricia Rojo Bushnell of the Midwest Innocence Project. In a statement after the Supreme Court ruling, she said, the victim's family opposes his execution. Jurors who originally sentenced him to death now oppose his execution. The prosecutor's office that convicted and sentenced him to death now admitted that they were wrong and zealously fought to undo the conviction to save Mr. Williams' life. So you have the prosecution's office, you have the victim's family, you have the jurors who convicted him, all saying he should not be executed. There were mistakes that were made, right? There is at least reasonable belief that he could be innocent. And they were calling for this to be delayed. And they still went through with it. Now, moving on to the Innocence Project here on this point-by-point breakdown. They start off with this. Number 1, a crime scene covered with forensic evidence contained no link to Mr. Williams. They say that Mr. Williams has been seeking to prove his innocence throughout the 23 years that he has spent on Missouri's death row. On August 11th, 1998, Felicia Gale, a former reporter at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was found stabbed to death in her home. The perpetrator left behind considerable forensic evidence, including fingerprints, footprints, hair, and trace DNA on the murder weapon itself, which was a knife from Miss Gale's kitchen. None of this forensic evidence matches Mr. Williams. So you have hair, fingerprints, footprints, DNA on the murder weapon itself, and none of it traced back to Mr. Williams. They still push forward with it. They say, number two, the prosecution's case against Mr. Williams was based entirely on the unreliable testimony of two incentivized witnesses. They say, again, the case against Mr. Williams turned on the testimony of two unreliable witnesses who were incentivized by promises of leniency in their own pending criminal cases and reward money. The investigation had gone cold until a jail inmate named Henry Cole, a man with a lengthy record, claimed that Mr. Williams confessed to him that he committed the murder while they were both locked up in jail. Cole directed police to Laura Asaro, a woman who had briefly dated Mr. Williams and had an extensive record of her own. Both of these individuals were known fabricators. Neither revealed any information that was not either included in media accounts about the case or already known to police. That should be a pretty major red flag there, right? Their statements were inconsistent with their own prior statements, with each other's accounts, and with the crime scene evidence, and none of the information they provided could be independently verified. Aside from their testimony, the only evidence connecting Mr. Williams to the crime was a witness who said that Mr. Williams sold him a laptop taken from Miss Gale's home, but the jury did not learn that Mr. Williams told the witness that he had received the laptop from Laura Asaro. I mean, what are we doing here, guys? This is one of the most obviously botched cases that I've ever seen. This is just, the beginning of it. They continue. They say, number three, Mr. Williams has repeatedly faced imminent execution as he tried to prove his innocence. So 9 years ago, the Missouri Supreme Court stayed Mr. Williams' execution and appointed a special master to review DNA testing of potentially exculpatory evidence. The DNA testing conducted in 2016 showed that Williams was not the source of the male DNA found on the murder weapon. He was not the DNA source found on the murder weapon. However, in 2017, after the testing was completed, but without conducting a hearing or making any findings based on the outcome of the testing, the appointed special master sent Mr. Williams' case back to the Missouri Supreme Court, and that court also, without considering the DNA testing results, again scheduled his execution. So what? You did this entire thing? You were, staying his execution, delaying it to look at this potential exculpatory evidence. The evidence showed that his DNA was not on the murder weapon, and then you just pushed through with it? You just completely ignored it? They say, on August 22nd, 2017, mere hours before he was said to be executed, and after eating his last meal, Mr. Williams received a stay of execution from the then governor, this guy Eric Greitens, and Greitens recognized that the new DNA results raised serious doubts about his guilt, and he convened a board of inquiry to investigate the case. Under Missouri law, the stay was to remain in place until the board of inquiry concluded this review. They say, however, in June of 2023, here we go, while the Board of Inquiry's review remained ongoing, Governor Mike Parson, without warning or notice, dissolved the board without a report or recommendation from the board. So he just came in, and as they were still undergoing this process, just dissolved it. No, we don't need to look into whether or not we're about to kill an innocent man. Let's just keep going forward with it, right? Immediately after Governor Parson dissolved the Board of Inquiry, Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey sought a new execution date. Jesus Christ. Mr. Williams filed a civil suit against Parson because the dissolution of the board without report or recommendation violated Missouri law and Williams' constitutional rights. After a Cole County judge denied the governor's motion to dismiss the lawsuit, the governor persuaded the Missouri Supreme Court to intervene. And then, in 2024, the Supreme Court dismissed his lawsuit, Mr. Williams' lawsuit, and immediately scheduled his execution for September 24th, which was yesterday, when the execution finally took place. They continue here. I know that this is a lot of, details that we're getting into here, but I think it's important to read through this entire process because it's exposing so many different steps throughout the entirety of this that something could have been done. right? It's not as if just 2 days ago somebody brought up some random new evidence and they're trying to delay the execution at the last moment. No, this has been going on for years. I mean, this seems to be just like rank corruption or disregard for human life here that's on display from some of these elected officials. They continue, they say, Number 4, although the victim's family opposes Mr. Williams' execution, the Missouri Attorney General has continued to fight to execute him. So again, I mean, as I just pointed out, the family of the victim who was murdered in this case is saying he shouldn't be executed. I mean, again, we have number 5, incentivized informants are now a leading cause of wrongful conviction. So this is getting into more of the sort of structural issues here. They say jailhouse informant testimony, like that leading to Mr. Williams' conviction, is one of the leading contributing factors of wrongful convictions nationally, playing a role in 15% of the nearly 600 DNA-based exoneration cases. 11 of the 54 individuals exonerated in Missouri were convicted with the use of informant testimony. So, listen, I'm no expert on this, but just reading these kinds of stats, it seems to me like if somebody has a potential direct incentive as somebody who's facing their own cases, or maybe they're already in jail or prison for something else, if they have a direct incentive where their case could be treated more lenient, by trying to give a testimony in a different case, maybe you should be really considerate about what they're saying, right? I mean, they're saying 15% of these exoneration cases came from testimony from informants in jailhouses. I don't know, man. I mean, they say 11, again, of the 54 individuals exonerated were convicted using this method. They say in capital cases, false testimony from incentivized witnesses is the leading cause of wrongful convictions, with informant testimony presented in 49.5% of wrongful convictions since the mid-70s, according to the Center on Wrongful Convictions. So, I mean, it seems like this is a pretty big issue here, right? Where you have people who, again, have an incentive to potentially testify in a different case and to potentially even just make something up, right? I mean, you can see the statistics there. 49.5% of wrongful convictions since the 70s use this kind of method to try to convict these people by having other people who have an incentive to potentially lie about it in order to benefit themselves. I mean, that is a wild statistic there. And again, they say that racial bias contributed to Mr. Williams' wrongful conviction. His jury was comprised of 11 white people and 1 black person. The prosecutor, whose institutional practice of racially discriminatory jury selection has been widely documented, successfully removed 6 of the 7 qualified black prospective jurors with peremptory challenges. A recent study of 400 death-eligible cases in St. Louis County over a 27-year period also revealed racial disparity in the use of the death penalty based upon the race of the victim. People who were convicted were 3.5 times more likely to receive the death penalty if the victim was white versus if they were black. I mean, come on, man. That's wild, man. 6 of the 7 qualified black prospective jurors were removed. There was only 1 left on the jury. And clearly this is a systemic issue here. 3.5 times more likely to be given the death penalty if the victim is white versus if the victim is black. I mean, come on. Now, I'll link this down below if you want to go read the rest of what they had to say here. It gets pretty dark when you get to the bottom and, they're doing a call to action and trying to, send people information on where to call and where to write letters and how to, potentially try to pressure so that he wouldn't be executed. But obviously, he ended up being executed. So, again, a little bit more of some statistics here on how much we get the death penalty wrong in this country. Since 1973, at least 200 people have been exonerated from death row in the U.S., which makes up about 4% of those sentenced to death being innocent. Now, 4% should be enough, I think, to just disregard this policy entirely, just by itself. You're saying that in 4% of cases, the person who the government is sentencing to death is innocent. To me, that's like, okay, maybe just stop executing people at all, right? No need for it. But even if it wasn't for these kinds of statistics here, morally, politically, I mean, I think at any level that you want to look at it, we should not still be doing executions, government-sanctioned executions, right? And there are many different reasons for that. I mean, they continue down here to describe the ongoing issues racially in this country with the disproportionality of Black people and Latino people who are affected by rulings towards the death penalty in the U.S. But I mean, man, they also point out that these numbers don't even demonstrate the full scope of the impact. I mean, 4%, that's the amount that have been exonerated, right? So how many have been sentenced to death and then it never really happened that they were exonerated, but maybe potentially they were innocent and the exculpatory evidence wasn't there. But I mean, they also say that these numbers don't demonstrate the full scope of the impact that the death penalty has on the problem of wrongful conviction, as the threat of the death penalty causes innocent people to plead guilty and induces false testimony from witnesses, which again is another layer of the issue here with the death penalty. If you're threatening somebody with the death penalty, even if they're innocent, they may be so fearful of being killed by the government that they say, okay, I will admit my guilt, even if I'm innocent, if you cut me a deal so that I'll get life in prison instead of getting the death penalty. So that adds, again, another layer to the issues going on here. Now, the final thing that I'll leave you guys off with is Democrats, as pointed out here by the People's City Council, have scrubbed opposition to the death penalty from their campaign platform. They actively decided to take it off from their platform. So now we have Republicans and Democrats as political parties who are apparently in favor of the death penalty. Now, I won't get into this in order to prevent this video from being, extremely long, but this is a great article here from the New York Times back in January of 2019, where they break down how Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor, as she sometimes tries to label herself, or at least is how she tried to label herself in the 2020 Democratic primary. But they get into some of the highly questionable, if not totally abhorrent history of Kamala Harris as a prosecutor, as an attorney general, and how in some cases she, kept people in prison or kept them on death row by using like technicalities, even though they knew there was potentially exculpatory evidence that could have proved their innocence. They talk about so many different structural issues that Kamala Harris participated in perpetuating. So, highly recommend you guys go and read this article. But man, I mean, this is all just so dark. It's so bleak. I saw this for a couple of days leading up to this. I think I was sort of late to hearing about this story. I only heard about it, I think maybe on like Sunday or Monday. But this is incredibly bleak stuff, okay? I mean, not only is it extremely dark that we even still have the death penalty in a majority of U.S. states around the country right now, but that you could have a man where there is the victim's family saying he shouldn't be executed, the prosecutor's office saying he shouldn't be executed, millions of people around the country petitioning and calling offices and politicians saying he shouldn't be executed, that you have potentially exculpatory evidence saying that he did not commit the crime. Even with all of that, even with the former jurors who convicted him saying that, yeah, this trial was incredibly fucked up and biased and racist and, maybe this shouldn't be followed through on, even with all of that, an innocent man could still be murdered like this. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. And I think it's worth noting, as I'm highlighting this Kamala Harris article here, that I did not see a single goddamn word from her on this. Not a single word from her on this, not a single word from Biden on this, not really a single word from any major Democrats as this was happening.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me. No one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying